Let's go down to verse 8. The Lord handed them over to Israel, and they struck them down, pursuing them as far as Great Sidon and Mishloth Maim to the east, as far as the valley of Mizpah. They struck them down, leaving no survivors. Joshua treated them as the Lord had told him. He hamstrung their horses and burned up their chariots. At this time, Joshua turned back, captured Hazor, and struck down its king with the sword, because Hazor had formerly been the leader of these kingdoms. So the king then, during this time, in Joshua's time, was Jabin. Well, now we have a king, Jabin, during the time of Judges, and we're talking about probably 100 years at this point. So it's obviously not the same king, because it said that Joshua killed Jabin. So what's thought here is that this Jabin may be like a name that was given to the ruler of the king of Hazor. And so even though they burned the city and they killed the king and killed, hamstrung the horses, burned all the chariots, after 100 years, because they didn't drive out the Canaanites, now we have them reestablishing, rebuilding Hazor, and then the king is Jabin of this particular city. Similar to, what did they call all the rulers of Egypt through all the years? Pharaoh. Okay, now, each Pharaoh had his own other name that went with it, and, Ramesses and Tutankhamun and all the other ones through the years. But so this may be the same situation. Syria, if I recall, a lot of times the Syrian kings would have Hadad connected to their name. We also studied other kings that had Adonai, the Canaanite kings, Adonai Bezek, Adonai, and there was another one named after the city. So these were probably, this Jabin is probably a term that was given to the ruler, the king of this city of Hazor. And he is the one now that's been oppressing the Israelites for 20 years. So they've rebuilt the city, they've reestablished themselves, they've built more chariots. Now they have 900 of them, got more horses over this time period between when Joshua conquered them and now. And so now, because of the oppression, the Israelites cry out to the Lord, verse 3. They cry out to the Lord, and so now God sends someone, a judge, to relieve them from the oppression that they're suffering. So again, this cycle that continues to repeat itself in Judges. Yeah.
Was Deborah the only woman who was a prophet in the Bible?
Hang on to that question. If I don't answer it in the next 10 minutes, ask it again.
All right. But she's the only one that I have to kind of think of.
Okay. All right. So the difference now between the three judges that we've had previously and the next judge is, as Lori mentioned, she's a woman. So let's pick it up there in verse 4. Deborah, a woman who was a prophetess and the wife of Lapidoth, was judging Israel at that time. It was her custom to sit under the palm tree of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites went up to her for judgment. So, first she is described, 1, as a woman, 2, as a prophetess, and 3, as a judge. All right, so to answer your question, Lori, there are at least 2 other prophetess mentioned, well, actually 3 other prophetess mentioned in the Old Testament And actually, I can think of one more. And then there are prophetess mentioned in the New Testament too. So Miriam, Moses and Aaron's sister, is, scriptures call her a prophetess. There is another one whose name is Huldah, and I think that's found in 2 Kings 22:14. Miriam is addressed as a prophet, or called a prophetess, in Exodus 15:20. There is a false prophetess, and I don't have her name here in front of me right now, that is later on. The same word is used 6 times in the Old Testament. Isaiah's wife is called a prophetess, but they think that the meaning really of that, even though it uses the same word, not that she was a prophet like Isaiah, but that she was the wife of a prophet. She was called a prophetess. And then Anna, who saw baby Jesus when his parents brought him to the temple, she's called a prophetess. And then the 4 daughters of Philip, one of the first Philip's one of the 7, and then he also then becomes an evangelist, the one who talks to the Ethiopian eunuch. His daughters are described as prophetess. So what does it mean to be a prophetess? So in studying that, Lori and everyone else, sometimes it means that maybe another word that could be used is someone who's good with song, or a poet or poetess, if you will, female. Could mean a wife of a prophet in the case of Isaiah's wife, but I think that's the only usage there of that. Huldah, the one that's mentioned in 2 Kings, they actually go to her to get a message from God, and obviously that's what prophets, and in this case prophetesses, do. So it's thought that Deborah had been given the Holy Spirit, God's Spirit had been put upon her, and she was then a messenger from God. Okay. Now, remember, prophets are not necessarily, quote, always, quote, fortune tellers. They can also just be delivering God's message. And that's probably what Deborah was doing. We also know from the other judges that we met so far in our study that, God gave them his Spirit to accomplish what they were supposed to do. So Deborah must have been known, and so people are coming to her to get judgment. And we said, well, the judges are mostly military leaders, and that's true. But evidently, because of what God had blessed her with, she is able then she's also helping to make decisions. And so they're coming to her to help get decisions made and find out what God's will is in certain situations. And she's become known for that. Now, do you guys have a tree named after you? She does. So they would come to this palm tree and consult with her. Now we know later that some of the prophets actually traveled in a circuit, kind of like some of the circuit preachers back in the 1800s in the United States, and they would go from city to city and do their work. And I think the example of that was an example of that was, I believe, Samuel. So, did that answer your question? I told you I'd get there. All right. You're welcome. Now, so we know where she is between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. So Ephraim's right there at the top of the tree. And at least wrong button. Let's go to this map. We can see a little bit better. No, we can't. Anyway, it's Bethel. I don't know if you can see it because the tree's probably in the way, but Bethel's right there. And then they think that, what was the other town that was mentioned there? Ramah is, I believe north of that. So that's where she is. And then we'll pick it up. Let's go to verse 6. She summoned Barak, son of Abinoam. I didn't probably pronounce that very correctly, from Kadesh in Naphtali. And that would be to the north, up in this area. She summons him and says to him, hasn't the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded you, go deploy the troops on Mount Tabor and take with you 10,000 men from the Naphtalites and the Zebulunites? Then I will lure Sisera, commander of Jabin's forces, his chariots and his army to the Wadi Kishon to fight against you, and I will hand him over to you. So now we'll probably go to this map. And here's Mount Tabor. And that's where Barak is located. And so Deborah says, take your men, take them off the mountain. I will lure Sisera, who's in this area. This is the Kishon River, which would also be called the Wadi of Kishon. And I think it says somewhere this Harosheth Hagoyim is where Sisera was. Yeah, that's in verse 2. So Deborah's going to lure him out from there, probably with some of the men that she's leading. And then Barak's going to bring his forces down from Mount Tabor. Barak said to her, if you will go with me, I will go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go. So, some have said, well, that makes Barak look weak, depending upon Deborah, a woman, but not necessarily. Let's go to Hebrews 11. Maybe. All right. So thinking back to our study of Hebrews, Hebrews 11 is sometimes called it has a name because of what we read in Hebrews 11. Look at the second word in the chapter. Verse 1. Faith. All right, this is sometimes called faith chapter because it talks about all these people that showed their faith in God throughout the ages. Then if you go down to verse 32. And what more can I say? Time is too short for me to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets, who by faith conquered kingdoms and ministered justice, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched the raging of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, gained strength after being weak, became mighty in battle, and put foreign armies to flight. So Barak is considered to be one of the faithful ones that's mentioned in Hebrews. But yet here he says, if you go with me, I will go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go. So is he showing a lack of faith there? Maybe, because, he should do whatever Deborah tells him because that message is coming from God. But we find out that she says, okay, I will go with you. And now I'm in verse 9. I will go with you, she said, but you will receive no honor on the road you are about to take, because the Lord will sell Sisera into a woman's hand. Now, most of us know the rest of the story, but if you're just reading along here, you're probably going to assume what woman is going to get credit for the victory here. Deborah? Maybe, probably. But that's not what's going to happen. But she says, I will go with you, but you're not going to receive honor because the Lord will sell Sisera into a woman's hand. So Deborah got up and went with Barak to Kadesh. Barak summoned Zebulun and Naphtali to Kadesh. 10,000 men followed him, and Deborah also went with him. So, I don't know if it's on here, Kadesh. Here's Mount Tabor, here's Kadesh of Naphtali, maybe. They're wondering about that. So, Mount Tabor, he's called the people from Naphtali and Zebulun, and which makes sense. They're the ones that are closest there. And we're going to learn later in chapter 5 that it wasn't just those two tribes who provided the troops, but I think the main body of the troops came from there. Now we shift gears a little bit because we got to introduce somebody else, another character. Now Heber the Kenite had moved away from the Kenites, the son of Hobab, Moses' father-in-law, and pitched his tent by the oak tree of Zaanannim, which was near Kadesh. So somewhere, maybe up in this area, here's Naphtali, and they think Kadesh is up in that area somewhere, close to that. This is where Heber the Kenite was. Now, who are the Kenites? Kenites. And it kind of tells you a little bit here. So when Moses when he fled from Egypt, he went to the Kenites, and he married one of them. And then during the Exodus, he invited the Kenites to come with them. Now, the Kenites were a nomadic group. They lived in the part of the land which is called the Midian. The Kenites were descendants of Keturah, which makes them shirt-tail cousins to the Israelites. Anyone remember who Keturah was? Got to go back to Genesis for that one. Is your finger up for a reason, Gene? Who's Keturah? How many wives did Abraham have that we know of? 3. Who were they? The other one was Sarah's maidservant, Hagar. Okay, so we read in Genesis that, Sarah had Isaac when she was quite old. Abraham had another wife, Keturah, and there were, different people then can trace their lineage back to Abraham through Keturah and her offspring. And the Kenites are one of those groups. So they were shirt-tail cousins to the Israelites. Go ahead. No? Okay. So let's make that connection. And then there was also the connection because of Moses and his wife and father-in-law Hobab and so on. So the Kenites kind of continued their nomadic journey then after they got to the promised land, just in a little bit different place. And this one is mentioned, Heber the Kenite, and beside the oak tree of Zaanannim, what was near Kadesh. It was reported to Sisera that Barak, son of Abinoam, had gone up to Mount Tabor. So Sisera summoned all of 900 of his iron chariots and all the people who were with him from Harosheth of the nations to the Wadi Kishon. Then Deborah said to Barak, "Move on, for this is the day the Lord has handed Sisera over to you. Hasn't the Lord gone before you?" So Barak came down from Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following him. Militarily, why was that not a good idea? He's on the mountain, and now he comes down. It's better to be up high and they come up to you, especially if they are depending upon iron chariots to be a part of their offense and or defense, right? So Because, and this is, I think, why Barak is included in the list of the people of faith. When Deborah says to Barak, today's the day, now's your day, come down from Mount Tabor with your 10,000 men and face these chariots on foot. You don't have any chariots. You've got to trust in God. God's going to take care of them. And we'll read here in a little bit one of the ways that he did. So Barak came down. The Lord threw Sisera and all his charioteers and all his army into confusion with the sword before Barak. So we don't know how God did this. We know other times that God goes before the Israelite army, and a lot of times the people are defeated before the Israelites even get there. Sisera left his chariot and fled on foot. Barak pursued the chariots and the army as far as Harosheth of the nations, and the whole army of Sisera fell by the sword. Not a single man was left. So even though they had the chariots, even though they had the advantage of fighting on flat ground rather than up in the mountains, God and Barak prevailed. And if we go over to chapter 5, we kind of get a explanation on one thing that may have helped. And it's little, because this is a poetic song in chapter 5. Go to verse 4. Lord, when you came down from Seir, when you marched from the fields of Edom, the earth trembled, the heavens poured rain, and the clouds poured water. The mountains melted before the Lord, even Sinai before the Lord, the God of Israel. So this recalls another time when God went before them and he provided a storm, he provided rain, and so on. And then if you go on down to verse 19. Kings came and fought, then the kings of Canaan fought at Tanakh, by the waters of Megiddo, which is another term that's used for this Kishon River. But they took no spoil of silver. The stars fought from the heavens. The stars fought with Sisera from their courses. And this is showing God's, poetically showing God's involvement in this battle. The river Kishon swept them away. The ancient river, the river Kishon, march on, O my soul, in strength. So if God provided a flash, rainstorm, flood, how would that help to make the chariots maybe not as capable as they could be? Makes mud. Things do not work well in mud. Well, chariots do not work well in mud. Neither do tractors. Neither do tanks. Mud, I don't know much about tanks, but I think that mud could cause a problem if there's enough of it. So here's God's way of using his creation to help the Israelites win this battle. Sisera takes off from the army. Now, why? Why doesn't he lead his army in battle? Why does he escape? I don't know. It doesn't really tell us, but he maybe had seen what was happening and he flees to save himself and maybe to save himself to fight another day. So let's go down to 17. Meanwhile, Sisera had fled on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. Not Canaanite, but Kenite. So the battle's fought probably in this area right here along the river, and then he flees over to Kadesh of Naphtali, and he goes to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber. because there was peace between Jabin, king of Hazor, and the family of Heber the Kenite. Now, see, if you're a nomad, you're probably wandering around in somebody else's land, taking your flocks and herds to find where the best grass is and the water is. So evidently they were getting along. The Canaanites and Jabin, king of Hazor, they were getting along. So Jael went out to greet Sisera and said to him, "Come in, my lord. Come in with me. Don't be afraid." So he went into her tent. She covered him with a rug. He said to her, "Please give me a little water to drink, for I am thirsty." She opened a container of milk, gave him a drink, and covered him again. Then he said to her, stand at the entrance to the tent. If a man comes and asks you, 'Is there a man here?' say no." And so he's asking for protection from the Israelites or anybody that might be pursuing him as a result of him leaving the battleground and trying to get away. She gives him not just water, she gives him milk to drink. And then he says, "Stand at the entrance to the tent and guard me." While he was sleeping from exhaustion, so evidently he had fought in the battle and then traveled to wherever Jael's tent was, and sleeping from exhaustion, Heber's wife Jael took a tent peg, grabbed a hammer, and went silently to Sisera. She hammered the peg into his temple and drove it into the ground, and he died. Now, explanation given by the commentators as far as the tent peg, probably wooden, could have been iron, probably wooden, but had to be very strong because the winds in that area were very strong, and if you wanted to keep your tent tied down, you had to have pretty strong and big pegs. And that would probably be the woman's job to put the tents up and down as they're moving. And so she probably knew how to drive a tent peg pretty well. And she did. That day, God subdued Jabin, king of Canaan, before the Israelites. The power of the Israelites had continued to increase until Jabin, king of Canaan, or against Jabin, king of Canaan, until they destroyed him. So, the woman that is going to win the day, that Deborah, predicted and said to Barak, is not Deborah herself, but instead it's Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. And so that's the story of Sisera. And then now the Israelites have continue the fight, and they're able to overcome Jabin, the king of Canaan, Hazor, until they destroyed him. All right, any questions on that? Good. So next week, we'll get into chapter 5, which is sometimes called the Song of Deborah and Barak. And we'll talk about the importance of songs in not only communicating history or what happened, but also remembering it. There are, if you didn't get chapter 5 questions, there's chapter 5 questions over there. There's also chapter 6 questions and a map for the rest of the military campaigns that are going to happen in the book of Judges. So you can pick that up. And Dean, would you have a word of prayer to close, please?
We thank you for the opportunity to and the ability to meet and be in your house around the table. This way you can hear us and we have to speak. This helps us to glorify you and all that you do for us. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen.